The morning sun cast long shadows across the ceremonial grounds of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the iron gates. Among them stood Marcus Thompson, a decorated United States Marine on his first visit to London. His military posture was unmistakable even in civilian clothes. Straight back, alert eyes, and the confident bearing of someone who had served 3 tours overseas. Marcus had always respected military traditions worldwide, and witnessing the famous changing of the guard ceremony was high on his London bucket list. He positioned himself near the front of the crowd, his camera ready to capture the precision and pageantry he had heard so much about. The tourists around him chattered excitedly in various languages, pointing and taking selfies as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Children pressed their faces against the railings while parents lifted them for better views. Street vendors sold miniature Union Jack flags and postcards nearby. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus noticed something that made his trained military eye narrow with concern. A man in a dark coat had been moving through the crowd, getting unusually close to families with children. The stranger's behavior seemed off. He would linger near groups, take photos that didn't seem focused on the palace, and his eyes constantly scanned the crowd rather than watching for the guards. Marcus's military instincts kicked in. Something wasn't right about this situation. He had learned to trust these feelings during his service, where being alert to unusual behavior could mean the difference between safety and danger. The man's movements were too deliberate, too calculated for a normal tourist. Without being obvious about it, Marcus began to track the suspicious individual's movements. He noticed the man had no tourist materials, no guidebook, no camera bag, no obvious signs of being a visitor. His clothes were also wrong for the weather, too heavy for the mild London morning. The crowd continued to grow thicker as the ceremony time approached. Marcus realized that if something was going to happen, this would be the perfect moment. Maximum people, everyone's attention focused in one direction, and multiple escape routes through the dense crowd. As these thoughts raced through his mind, Marcus caught sight of the royal guards beginning to march into position. Their red tunics were immaculate, their movements synchronized to perfection. But his attention was divided between admiring their discipline and keeping watch on the suspicious figure who had now moved even closer to a family with 3 young children. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Tourists raised their phones and cameras, ready to capture every moment of the traditional ceremony. The sound of military boots on pavement grew louder as the guards approached their positions. Marcus found himself in an impossible situation. Should he alert security based on just a feeling? Would anyone believe an American tourist who claimed something seemed wrong? Or should he continue watching and risk being too late if his instincts were correct? The suspicious man had now stopped moving and was standing directly behind the family with children. His hand kept reaching into his coat pocket, and Marcus could see sweat on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Every alarm bell in Marcus's military-trained mind was ringing. As the royal guards took their ceremonial positions, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't risk being wrong about a potential threat to innocent people, especially children. His Marine training had taught him that sometimes you have to act on instinct. Even when you're not certain, the ceremony was about to begin. Hundreds of people were packed into a small area, and Marcus was possibly the only person who had noticed the potential danger. He took a deep breath and prepared to do what his training and conscience demanded, knowing that whatever happened next would unfold in front of hundreds of witnesses and some of the most disciplined soldiers in the world. The stage was set for a confrontation that no one in the crowd expected, least of all the royal guards who were about to witness something that would test their own training and discipline in ways they had never imagined. Marcus moved swiftly but carefully through the crowd, his eyes never leaving the suspicious man. Years of military training had taught him how to navigate through people without causing panic or drawing unwanted attention. He excused himself politely as he squeezed between tourists, his heart rate increasing with each step. The royal guards had now taken their positions for the ceremony. Their famous bearskin hats stood tall and imposing, and their faces showed no emotion as they prepared for the traditional ritual. The crowd had grown silent with respect and anticipation, creating an almost sacred atmosphere around the ancient ceremony. As Marcus got closer to the suspicious individual, he could see more details that confirmed his concerns. The man's hands were shaking slightly and he kept checking his watch as if timing something. His positioning behind the family seemed deliberate. He had a clear path to them and an easy escape route through the crowd. The father of the family was busy lifting his youngest daughter onto his shoulders so she could see over the adults in front of them. The mother was helping their older children find good spots to stand. None of them had any idea that someone potentially dangerous was standing just feet behind them. Marcus was now close enough to act, but he faced a critical decision. If he was wrong about the threat, he would cause unnecessary panic and possibly disrupt an important military ceremony. If he was right and did nothing, innocent people could be hurt. His military training told him to trust his instincts, but his civilian status made him hesitate. The suspicious man suddenly reached deeper into his coat pocket, and Marcus saw his chance disappearing. Without another moment of hesitation, the Marine acted on his training and protective instincts. He stepped forward quickly and placed a firm hand on the man's shoulder. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said in a calm but authoritative voice that carried the unmistakable tone of military command. "I need you to slowly remove your hand from your pocket and step away from that family." The entire crowd around them seemed to freeze. The man spun around, his eyes wide with surprise and something that looked like fear. His hand was still in his coat pocket, and Marcus could see him gripping something inside. "I don't know what you're talking about," the man stammered, but his voice was shaky and unconvincing. "I'm just watching the ceremony like everyone else." Marcus kept his voice steady but firm. "I'm a United States Marine, and I'm asking you to comply with my request. Remove your hand from your pocket slowly and step away from these people." The family had now noticed the commotion behind them. The father turned around, still holding his daughter on his shoulders, confusion clear on his face. Other tourists began to notice that something unusual was happening, and a murmur started to spread through the nearby crowd. What happened next shocked everyone, including Marcus. Instead of complying or trying to run, the suspicious man made a sudden aggressive move toward the family. Marcus reacted instantly, using his military training to intercept and neutralize the threat. The confrontation happened so quickly that most people didn't understand what they were seeing. Marcus moved with the precision and speed of his military training, effectively stopping the man's advance while trying to minimize danger to the surrounding civilians. But the royal guards had also been watching. Their training included constant awareness of their surroundings, even during ceremonial duties. When they saw a physical altercation beginning just meters from their position, their own protective instincts and protocols kicked in. The lead royal guard, a sergeant with 15 years of service, had to make his own split-second decision. He saw an unknown person engaged in what appeared to be an assault near civilian families. His duty was to protect the ceremony, the crowd, and maintain order. Without breaking the formal discipline that royal guards are famous for, the sergeant signaled to his fellow guards. In perfect synchronization, they moved to contain what they perceived as a security threat. Their movement was so smooth and professional that many tourists initially thought it was part of the ceremony. Marcus suddenly found himself in a completely unexpected situation. He had successfully stopped what he believed was a potential threat to innocent people, but now he was facing some of the most highly trained ceremonial guards in the world, who saw him as the problem that needed to be contained. The crowd's murmur had grown to a buzz of confusion and excitement. Phones and cameras that had been pointed at the ceremony were now focused on the unfolding drama. No one was quite sure what was happening, but everyone could sense that this was not part of the normal program. The Royal Guard sergeant approached Marcus with the measured, precise steps that had been drilled into him through years of training. His expression remained completely neutral, showing no emotion or intent, which made him even more intimidating. The other guards maintained their positions but were clearly ready to act if needed. Marcus found himself in an incredibly difficult position. He had his hands on the suspicious man, who was still struggling and trying to reach whatever was in his coat pocket. At the same time, he could see the royal guards moving to surround him, treating him as the primary threat to public safety. "Sir, release that individual immediately and step back," the Royal Guard sergeant commanded in a voice that was calm but carried absolute authority. His tone was respectful but left no room for negotiation or discussion. Marcus realized he had seconds to resolve the situation before it escalated beyond anyone's control. He was trained to follow orders from superior officers, but these weren't his superior officers. and he genuinely believed he was protecting innocent people from a real threat. "I'm a United States Marine," Marcus called out clearly, hoping his military credentials would help the situation. This man was behaving suspiciously around that family with children. "I believe he may be armed." The crowd around them had grown completely silent now, sensing the serious tension between these trained military personnel. Parents pulled their children closer, and many people began slowly backing away from the confrontation area. The Royal Guard sergeant processed this information quickly. His training included working with international military personnel, and he recognized the bearing and demeanor of a fellow soldier. However, his primary duty was to maintain order and protect civilians, regardless of who was involved. Meanwhile, the suspicious man took advantage of the confusion to make another desperate attempt to break free from Marcus's grip. As he struggled, something fell from his coat pocket onto the ground with a metallic clatter that everyone nearby could hear clearly. All eyes immediately focused on the object that had fallen. It was a large knife with a fixed blade, clearly not something any tourist would normally carry. The sight of the weapon changed everything in an instant, validating Marcus's concerns and completely shifting the dynamic of the situation. The Royal Guard sergeant's expression remained unchanged, but his body language showed he had quickly reassessed the situation. His fellow guards adjusted their positions, now focusing on the man with the knife rather than treating Marcus as the primary threat. "Everyone remain calm and step back," the sergeant announced to the crowd in a voice that projected confidence and control. His years of training in crowd management kicked in as he worked to prevent panic while dealing with a genuine security threat. Marcus maintained his hold on the suspicious man, who had become even more agitated after losing his weapon. The Marine's training told him not to let go until proper security could take control, but he also needed to show the Royal Guards that he was cooperating with their authority. "I'm going to maintain control of this individual until your security arrives," Marcus said clearly to the sergeant. "I believe he intended to harm that family." The Royal Guard sergeant gave a slight nod, the first break in his ceremonial composure. He had recognized that Marcus was a fellow professional, acting to protect civilians, not a threat to be contained. However, the situation was still far from resolved. The family that had been targeted was now fully aware of what had happened. The father had set his daughter down and moved his family further away, his face pale with the realization of how close they had come to danger. The mother was calling emergency services on her mobile phone, her hands shaking as she dialed. What happened next surprised everyone, including the experienced Royal Guards. Instead of waiting for additional security to arrive, the suspicious man made one final desperate attempt to escape. He twisted violently in Marcus's grip and lunged toward the knife that had fallen to the ground. This movement triggered an immediate response from both Marcus and the Royal Guards. The Marine's combat training kicked in as he moved to prevent the man from reaching the weapon, while the Royal Guards moved with the precision and coordination they had practiced thousands of times. But what followed was not the coordinated response everyone expected. In the confusion and split-second timing, Marcus and the lead Royal Guard both moved to secure the weapon and contain the threat. Their training from different military traditions and their lack of communication led to a moment where these two professional soldiers found themselves in direct physical opposition. The crowd gasped as they witnessed what appeared to be a confrontation between the American Marine and the British Royal Guard, neither of whom wanted to back down from what they each saw as their duty to protect innocent people. The moment of contact between Marcus and the Royal Guard sergeant was electric with tension. Both men were highly trained professionals who had dedicated their lives to military service, and neither was accustomed to backing down when they believed they were in the right. What the crowd witnessed was not actually a fight, but rather a careful, controlled test of wills between two soldiers who respected each other's training, even as they found themselves in opposition. Marcus maintained his grip on the suspicious man, while also positioning himself to prevent the Royal Guard from interfering with what he saw as his duty. The Royal Guard sergeant, for his part, was following protocols that required him to take control of any security situation in his area of responsibility. His movements were precise and measured, designed to gain compliance without unnecessary force, but also showing that he would not be deterred from his duty. The tension was broken by an unexpected voice from the crowd. "Let them handle it!" shouted an elderly man wearing a military veteran's pin on his jacket. "Can't you see they're both trying to protect us?" This comment seemed to resonate with other people in the crowd, and murmurs of agreement began to spread. The tourists and local residents who had come to watch a peaceful ceremony found themselves witnessing something far more dramatic. But they also recognized that both men were acting from a place of genuine concern for public safety. The suspicious man, meanwhile, was still struggling to break free, but his movements were becoming weaker and more desperate. Marcus's military training and restraint techniques was proving effective, and it was clear that the immediate physical threat was under control. The Royal Guard sergeant made a decision that showed both his military wisdom and his ability to adapt to unusual situations. Instead of continuing to treat Marcus as a problem to be solved, he stepped slightly back and addressed him as one professional to another. "Marine, I need you to transfer custody of this individual to British security when they arrive," the sergeant said in a tone that was firm but respectful.
"Can you maintain control until then?"
Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. The Royal Guard was acknowledging his professional competence and treating him as an ally rather than a threat. "Yes, sir," he replied with the crisp military courtesy that was second nature to him. "I can maintain control." This exchange seemed to diffuse much of the tension in the immediate area. The other Royal Guards relaxed slightly, though they remained alert and ready to act if needed. The crowd began to sense that the crisis was being managed professionally by people who knew what they were doing. But the situation was far from over. The noise and commotion had attracted attention from palace security, metropolitan police, and even some plainclothes officers who had been positioned throughout the crowd. Multiple authorities were now converging on the scene, each with their own protocols and responsibilities. The first to arrive were two metropolitan police officers who had been stationed nearby. They approached the scene with their hands near their equipment, clearly prepared for the worst based on the reports they had received over their radios. "What's the situation here?" the lead police officer called out as he approached, his eyes quickly scanning the scene to assess the threat level. The Royal Guard sergeant, maintaining his professional composure, quickly briefed the officers on what had transpired. "We have a suspicious individual who was behaving threateningly toward civilians and was found to be carrying a concealed weapon. This gentleman," he indicated Marcus, "is a United States Marine who intervened to protect the public." The police officers looked at the knife on the ground, then at Marcus maintaining control of the struggling suspect, and finally at the Royal Guards who were clearly supporting, rather than opposing the Americans' actions. The situation was unusual, but the facts seemed clear enough. As more security personnel arrived, the crowd found themselves witnessing something unprecedented. The ceremonial grounds of Buckingham Palace had become the scene of international military cooperation in the face of a real security threat. Marcus began to realize that his actions had created a situation far beyond what he had anticipated when he first noticed the suspicious behavior. He had intervened to protect a family, but now found himself at the center of an incident involving multiple law enforcement agencies and some of the most elite ceremonial guards in the world. The most remarkable thing, however, was the mutual respect that had developed between him and the Royal Guards. Despite their initial confrontation, both sides had recognized the professionalism and good intentions of the other. The sergeant in particular seemed to appreciate Marcus's military bearing and his commitment to protecting civilians. As they waited for the situation to be fully resolved, Marcus and the Royal Guard sergeant found themselves standing side by side, both maintaining vigilance while security forces took control of the scene. Neither man spoke, but there was a sense of mutual understanding between them that transcended their different uniforms and nationalities. As the immediate crisis settled into a more controlled situation, something unexpected began to happen among the crowd. Instead of dispersing as people usually do after an incident, the tourists and locals remained, many of them openly discussing what they had just witnessed. "Did you see how they worked together?" one woman asked her companion, her voice filled with admiration. The American and the British soldier, they were like a team by the end. Marcus could hear fragments of these conversations as he maintained his position. The police had taken custody of the suspicious individual, who was now in handcuffs and being led away for questioning. The knife had been secured as evidence and the immediate threat was completely neutralized. What struck Marcus most was the behavior of the royal guards throughout the entire incident. Despite the disruption to their ceremony, they had maintained their discipline and professionalism. Even now, as the situation wound down, they were prepared to resume their duties as if nothing had happened. The royal guard sergeant approached Marcus one final time before the scene was completely cleared. "Marine," he said quietly, "that was good work. You potentially saved that family from serious harm." Marcus felt a surge of respect for this British soldier, who had shown such adaptability and professionalism under pressure. "Thank you, Sergeant. Your men handled this situation perfectly. I'm sorry for disrupting your ceremony." The sergeant allowed himself the smallest of smiles, barely visible beneath his bearskin hat. "The ceremony can wait. Protecting people comes first, as you well know." This brief exchange was overheard by several people in the crowd, and word of it began to spread quickly. The story was no longer just about a security incident. It was becoming something larger about military professionalism and international cooperation. A young girl, no more than 8 years old, tugged on her father's sleeve and pointed toward Marcus and the royal guards. "Daddy, are they friends now?" she asked in a voice that carried clearly in the quiet aftermath of the incident. Her father looked at the scene, the American Marine and the British Royal Guard standing respectfully near each other, both groups having proved their dedication to protecting innocent people. "Yes, sweetheart," he said thoughtfully. "I think they are." The family that had been targeted approached Marcus as the police finished taking their statements. The father, still visibly shaken but grateful, extended his hand to the Marine. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saw something we didn't see and you acted when you could have just walked away. You might have saved our lives." Marcus shook the man's hand firmly. "I'm just glad everyone is safe," he replied simply. "That's what matters," the mother added. "Our children will remember this day, not as the day something terrible almost happened, but as the day good people looked out for strangers." As news of the incident began to spread beyond the immediate crowd, people started taking photos and videos not of the disruption, but of the aftermath. The respectful interaction between the American Marine and the British Royal Guards, the grateful family, and the crowd of people who had witnessed something remarkable. Palace security had completed their initial assessment and determined that the incident was contained and resolved. The senior security officer briefed the Royal Guard sergeant, and within minutes, preparations began to resume the ceremonial activities. Marcus prepared to leave the area, assuming his part in the day's events was over. He had done what his training and conscience demanded. The threat had been neutralized and normal activities could resume. But as he started to walk away, something happened that no one expected. The Royal Guard sergeant called out to him in a voice that carried across the ceremonial grounds. "Marine Thompson," the sergeant said formally, using Marcus's name, which he had learned during the police questioning. "Would you do us the honor of remaining for the ceremony?" Marcus stopped and turned around, surprised by the invitation. The crowd around him had also heard the request, and many people were looking between him and the Royal Guards with curiosity and anticipation. "Sergeant?" Marcus responded, not quite sure what was being asked of him. The Royal Guard sergeant maintained his formal posture, but his tone carried a warmth that hadn't been there during the crisis. "After what happened here today, it would be our privilege to have a fellow soldier witness our ceremony. You've earned the respect of the Guard." The crowd began to murmur with approval and excitement. Many people had been moved by what they had witnessed, not just the security incident, but the professional respect that had developed between these military personnel from different countries. Marcus felt a deep sense of honor at the invitation. To be welcomed by the Royal Guards after their confrontation earlier was more meaningful than any medal or commendation he had ever received. Marcus accepted the invitation with the same crisp military courtesy he had shown throughout the entire incident. "It would be my honor, Sergeant," he replied, and took a respectful position where the Royal Guard had indicated. What happened next transformed the entire atmosphere of the ceremonial grounds. Word of the invitation had spread quickly through the crowd, and people began to understand that they were witnessing something truly special, a moment of international military brotherhood that transcended uniforms and nationalities. The Royal Guards resumed their positions for the ceremony, but there was something different in their bearing now. While they maintained their famous discipline and precision, There was also a sense of shared purpose and mutual respect that hadn't been there before the incident. As the ceremony began, Marcus found himself in the unique position of being both a spectator and an honored guest. The tourists around him were acutely aware of his presence and the role he had played in the day's events. Many people quietly approached him to express their gratitude and admiration. "You're a hero," whispered an elderly woman standing next to him. "You saw danger and you acted even though you're in a foreign country and didn't have to get involved." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the word hero. In his mind, he had simply done what any responsible person should do when they see a potential threat to innocent people, but he was beginning to understand that his actions had meant more to people than just stopping one dangerous individual. The ceremony proceeded with its traditional precision and pageantry, but the crowd was more engaged than usual. People kept glancing between the royal guards performing their duties and Marcus watching respectfully from his position. There was a palpable sense that they were witnessing history being made. During one of the quieter moments of the ceremony, the royal guard sergeant made eye contact with Marcus across the ceremonial ground. Without breaking his formal position or disrupting the proceedings, the sergeant gave an almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Marcus responded with the same subtle military courtesy. This brief exchange was noticed by many in the crowd, and it seemed to symbolize something larger than the individuals involved. People began taking photos and videos not just of the ceremony, but of this moment of connection between military professionals from different nations. As the ceremony continued, Marcus reflected on the unexpected turn his London vacation had taken. He had come to see a famous tourist attraction, and instead found himself involved in a security incident that had tested his training, his judgment, and his character. But more than that, he had experienced something he would never have expected: a profound moment of mutual respect with soldiers from another country's military tradition. Despite their initial confrontation, both he and the royal guards had recognized their shared commitment to protecting innocent people. The family he had protected remained nearby throughout the ceremony, and Marcus could see them pointing him out to other family members who had arrived after hearing about the incident. Their children, who had been frightened during the crisis, were now looking at him with the wide-eyed admiration that children reserve for real-life heroes. As the ceremony neared its conclusion, something unprecedented happened. The royal guard sergeant, while maintaining his position and formal bearing, began to speak in a voice that carried clearly across the ceremonial grounds. "Today's ceremony has been honored by the presence of a visiting military professional," he announced in the traditional formal tone used for ceremonial proclamations. "Marine Thompson of the United States." Marine Corps distinguished himself in the protection of British civilians and demonstrated the highest ideals of military service. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause, something that almost never happens during the formal ceremony. People were clapping not just for Marcus, but for what his actions represented: courage, selflessness, and the universal military commitment to protecting innocent people. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the recognition, but he also understood that this moment was bigger than him personally. It was about the bonds that connect military personnel across national boundaries, and about the shared values that make such connections possible. The royal guards completed their ceremony with the same precision they always maintained, but as they prepared to march away, something else unexpected happened. Instead of immediately departing, they paused in their formation, and the sergeant stepped forward to address Marcus directly. "Marine Thompson," he said in a voice that combined military formality with genuine warmth. "The Queen's Guard salutes a fellow soldier who upholds the finest traditions of military service." With perfect synchronization, the entire guard unit presented arms in Marcus's direction, a formal military salute that represented the highest honor they could offer to a visiting service member. Marcus instinctively came to attention and returned the salute with the precision and respect that had been drilled into him through years of military service. The moment stretched across the ceremonial grounds, connecting two military traditions separated by an ocean, but united by shared values of duty, honor, and service. The crowd watched in complete silence, understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Phones and cameras captured the moment from every angle, but the real impact was felt in the hearts of everyone present. This was more than a tourist attraction or a security incident. It was a powerful demonstration of what connects people across national and cultural boundaries. As the salute concluded, the royal guards resumed their formation and marched away with the same disciplined precision they had maintained throughout the entire incident. But something had changed in the atmosphere of the ceremonial grounds. The formal barriers between performer and audience, between British and foreign visitors, seemed to have dissolved into something more human and universal. The crowd began to disperse slowly, many people lingering to discuss what they had witnessed. Marcus found himself surrounded by tourists and locals who wanted to thank him, shake his hand, or simply be part of the moment that had unfolded. "I've been coming to this ceremony for 20 years, said an elderly British gentleman, his voice filled with emotion. "I've never seen anything like what happened today. You and our guards, you showed us what military service really means." A group of American tourists approached Marcus with obvious pride in their fellow countrymen. "You represented us well today," one of them said. "You showed that Americans care about people everywhere, not just at home." But perhaps the most meaningful interaction came from the family he had protected. The parents approached him one final time before leaving, bringing their 3 children with them. "We want our children to remember this day," the mother said, her voice still emotional from the morning's events, not because of what could have happened, but because of what did happen. They saw someone who cared enough about strangers to act when it mattered. The youngest child, the little girl who had been on her father's shoulders during the incident, looked up at Marcus with the serious expression that children sometimes have when they're trying to understand something important. "Are you a superhero?" she asked in the direct way that only children can manage. Marcus knelt down to her level and smiled. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who thinks people should look out for each other. There are lots of people like that in the world, you just have to look for them." As the family walked away, Marcus realized that this simple conversation with a child had captured something essential about the day's events. It wasn't about military training or heroic actions, it was about the basic human responsibility to care for one another. The Royal Guard sergeant had remained nearby as the crowd dispersed, and he approached Marcus for one final conversation. Out of the formal ceremonial setting, he seemed more approachable, though he maintained the bearing and dignity of his position. "Marine Thompson," he said, extending his hand for a firm handshake. "It's been an honor to serve alongside you today, even under these unusual circumstances." Marcus shook the sergeant's hand with genuine respect. "The honor was mine, Sergeant. Your professionalism and adaptability under pressure were impressive. You and your men are a credit to your service." The sergeant nodded appreciatively. "Different uniforms, same commitment," he said simply, and those 5 words seemed to sum up everything that had happened that morning. As Marcus finally left the ceremonial grounds, he reflected on how completely his expectations for the day had been overturned. He had come as a tourist to observe a famous ceremony, but instead had become part of a story that would be remembered by everyone who witnessed it. The incident had been captured on dozens of phones and cameras, and within hours, videos and photos of the confrontation, the cooperation, and especially the final salute were spreading across social media platforms worldwide. People were sharing the story not just as news, but as an example of the best qualities that military service can represent. But for Marcus, the lasting impact wasn't about the attention or recognition. It was about the moment when he realized that the values he had learned in the Marine Corps, protecting the innocent, standing up for what's right, and respecting fellow service members, were truly universal values that transcended national boundaries. As he walked away from Buckingham Palace, Marcus understood that he would carry this experience with him for the rest of his life. It had reminded him why he had chosen military service in the first place, and had shown him that the brotherhood of arms extends far beyond the boundaries of any single nation's military.